today's episode is a very special one. I'll be joined by Rob Sanders. Rob is a teacher who writes and a writer who teaches. He's an award-winning picture book author of both fiction and nonfiction, recognized as one of the pioneers of LGBTQIA plus literary nonfiction for children. Always striving to break new ground, Rob has written the first picture books about the Pride flag, the Stonewall Uprising, a transgender Civil War soldier, a gay presidential candidate, and the first gay marriage in America. His books are beautiful and bold, and unapologetically, they celebrate the LGBTQ plus community. Rob captures the kind of truth and color and compassion that help young readers understand who they are and how they fit in this world. But as you might imagine, not everyone appreciates that message, especially in the state of Florida, where Rob's books have been repeatedly challenged and banned and have even landed Rob at the top of Ron DeSantis's book ban list. Rob has become one of the most important voices in the national conversation around censorship and representation. His new picture book, Book Comes Home, A Banned Book's Journey, tells the story of a book removed from a library, from the book's own perspective and the children who ultimately rescue it. It's a powerful metaphor for what's happening right now in our schools and communities. If his name sounds familiar, it might be because of his 2018 book, Pride, the story of Harvey Milk and the Rainbow Flag, which became the most banned book in the country during the 2021-2022 school year. Rob's mission is simple: to fill in the missing pieces of our shared story and to make sure every child can see themselves reflected in it. Rob has written over 20 books to date. And in this episode, Rob will also share several incredible resources for anyone who wants to learn more about history as it relates to the topics that we discuss in this episode. Rob highlights the importance of knowing where we come from and who have helped paved the way. All of the books and resources he mentions are linked in the episode description so you can explore them further and continue the conversation beyond this episode. Today, we're talking about his journey, the fight against censorship, and why telling these stories, especially to kids, matters now more than ever. So without further ado, I give you my conversation with Rob Sanders. Rob, welcome to He's Not Wrong. I appreciate you so much for joining us on the podcast today. And right now we're living in a moment where censorship has reached a breaking point. Book bans have truly exploded across the country, and especially in Florida where you live and teach. Florida's become the epicenter and is responsible for, I believe, over like 40 or 4,000 book bans this year alone, if I'm not mistaken on that stat. But among most targeted books is your children's books. Pride, the story of Harvey Milk and the Rainbow Flag, a gentle and hopeful story about equality, unity, and love. And so what I'm curious about to start out is, when did you first realize that Pride and your other books were being targeted or banned? Can you describe what that moment was like, both as an author and as a teacher?
Well, it's interesting because Pride came out in 2018, and I'd been writing children's books for a while, but fictional, lighthearted kind of picture books. And I had been inspired to write Pride. And when Pride came out, 2018, that's long before, the moms and all the other organizations came about. But I always let parents know that I was going to be reading one of my books in class. And I had 3 parents who requested that their kids not participate in that reading as early as 2018. We already had a policy in Florida that if any parent objected to any text, their child could be given, or any lesson, their child could be given an alternate lesson in an alternate environment. So that was my first experience. And one of the moms was very persevered in that, went all the way to the State Department of Education. And finally, with a meeting with our diversity and equity officer, our assistant superintendent at the time, my principal, my union rep, and me, we discussed whether this book could be read in my class. Interestingly, Chad, it was already being read all over my campus and all over my district. It was only my classroom where it was not being read. But finally, an assistant superintendent said in 2018, oh, this mother doesn't want anyone to read the book, or she doesn't want her child to read the book. When he understood the situation, he said, no parent can make a decision for another parent, only for their own child. 2018. As of last month, Hillsborough County, the same district where I taught, is the highest in Florida for banned books, the highest district in Florida, and the second highest in the nation. So that's happened since 2018. And it is, it's devastating, not for me as an author, but knowing that kids don't have access to the books that are out there that weren't there when I was a kid, or would imagine when you were a kid either.
What was that mom's justification for taking it all the way up to, you said the state superintendent or state board of it? What was her reasoning? How did she justify that?
Well, that sexuality was something that should only be discussed at home, was her opinion. Well, if you read Pride, or if you read any biography, if you're reading about Martin Luther King and you meet Coretta in the book, we're not learning about Martin's sexuality just because we meet his wife, you know? Yeah. Likewise, you're not learning about sexuality when you read a history book about someone in the LGBTQ community. But that was her premise, was that should be something that a parent should talk to their child about at home.
It's striking to me that a story about hope and inclusion has become one of the most banned picture books in the country. And so I'm curious what you think that says about who we are as a country in 2025, and about what kind of stories some people are trying to silence.
Yeah. So probably most people have read or know that the majority of books being challenged, banned, there are a lot of other words for it, sequestered, pulled from shelves, etc., are books by and about people of color and members of the LGBTQ plus community. It's a very targeted kind of effort, and it is meant to erase history, ignore history, whitewash history. It's disturbing. It's disturbing. As a person, as I mentioned earlier, you know, I grew up in the 60s and 70s. Obviously, there weren't books about LGBTQ people available. We weren't in TV shows. We weren't in movies, except the occasional evil character or character who was kind of a joke, you know, a caricature. But truly, Chad, I would be straight if books could determine your gender, because that's all I read, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the only history I knew. Those are the only people I met. They're the only people I saw. They're the only people I came in contact with at church, at school, in my neighborhood. So, you know, the whole premise that these books are harmful in some kind of way, obviously, is a distraction. That's not true.
No, that's such a good point that you just made, because I've often have said, because I grew up in Montgomery, Alabama. I currently live in Birmingham, Alabama. I grew up in a Catholic military conservative family, went to a Catholic school for 13 years. I sure as hell did not see anyone that I say look like me, but had that same feeling that I had at that age. That I had no exposure to anyone who might be able to relate to me as a kid. And I can only imagine where I would be today, what my thought processes would be, what more I could have done growing up if I did have someone that I could have related to or seen that, like, this is okay. And so I often say, because that is my experience, I did have dark thoughts growing up because I felt so alone and so isolated, especially with the community that I had. And like, with those dark thoughts that I had, I often tell people, like, I would not wish those feelings or those thoughts against my worst enemy.
Right.
I just simply wouldn't. And to say that I actively chose that is, I mean, it's appalling to me that anyone could think that it's a choice and to not understand the importance of young kids seeing representation at all levels of their development. But I digress on that. Just to talk to your
Well,
point about if,
let me digress with you because I lived in
yeah.
Birmingham for a year,
Oh, wow.
and grew up a Southern Baptist. So we probably could compare guilt notes. But
Yep.
I just heard today a quote from Dr. King where he said that the most segregated hour in America is from 11 to noon on Sundays.
Mm.
And that was in the 60s, but pretty much true today as well, that in those religious environments where we should be finding safety and love and acceptance, we have historically been segregated by not only by our race, but also by our sexual orientation. So
Yeah.
anywhere we go, be it school, church, other organizations, kids face that today as well.
Yeah. You often say that your books just tell history, and somehow telling history in today's society has become some sort of a radical act. So I'm wondering, why do you think that truth telling, especially when it comes to minority groups like LGBTQ plus, why that's become such a threatening thing to those in power who are making these decisions to ban books like the ones that you have made?
I think in most times when someone is trying to develop wedges between people, that the things that are often attacked are the things that are actually the least harmful, but they can be things that can cause emotional responses. So trans people, we know people in our community, that's 1% of the American population.
Yep.
And not a group with a huge voice, not with power, not with authority to change things, but they're being attacked.
Yeah.
Drag queens, books, teachers, libraries, things that aren't harmful, but can be made to be the red flag that's being waved in people's faces. And it can get people upset and up in arms and united around a cause, even if that cause isn't a cause that's worthwhile or that will make a difference in a positive way. It will just make a difference in a negative way.
Your recent book Comes Home, a banned book's journey. And for my audience who's listening, if you haven't heard about this book, is a story that personifies censorship through the eyes of a children's library book. Why did you choose to tell this story from the book's perspective? And what do you hope that the listeners and readers would feel when they see censorship through its eyes?
Yeah, Book Comes Home it went through, as most books do, went through many stages, many revisions to get to where the final edit or final copy is today. But my thought was really about pride, because I knew that kids who were looking for Pride or similar books weren't finding them in their library. And so I was trying to talk about that issue. And often when I first start writing something, it's really kind of militant, it's out there, it's in your face, but how do you make that story something that's approachable to kids is always the question. So I finally landed on this being a book story told from the perspective of the book itself. What would it feel like if you're the book that's now can't be with your readers, can't be on the shelves, that you're feeling shamed because you're put in a dark room in the back of the library and nobody can come to you. So I just wanted to explore it from that perspective. And in so doing, also the book gives kids, the readers of these banned books, the power. They're the ones who make books come back out of that banned place, that back closet. They're the ones who do the action. So those two things, telling it from the perspective of the book and giving kids the power to change things, were the two things that I was most excited about when I finally landed on telling the story in that way.
When a book is removed from shelves, like it's not vanished, it isn't erased, maybe visibly, but not from existence. For the children who saw themselves within those pages, and for kids and children of color and kids from diverse families, like these books aren't stories. They're literally mirrors that affirm their existence. And I know we've already stated how important it is that kids can see themselves represented in books, but you've spent years teaching in Hillsborough County. What ramifications will these book bans have for the children and the teachers in places like Hillsborough County?
Yeah. There's an interesting thing when people start counting how many books are banned. PEN America will say that there's over 600 books that have been banned in Hillsborough County. Hillsborough County will say that it's like 50 books. And the difference is that Hillsborough's only counting books that are officially banned, while PEN America is counting any challenge, because books that are removed from the shelf, we're going to put it over here while we consider what to do with it, have been taken away from kids too. So challenge books are essentially banned in that kids can't read them. So that's an important distinction to keep in mind. As a matter of fact, the American Library Association only counts officially banned. PEN America counts all the ones that have been challenged or set aside, plus the ones that have been banned. So the effect is, here's what I think one of the big effects is. When I was growing up and there weren't any books about my history, that's sad, but I didn't know there was a history and I didn't know what I was missing out on. That's tragic. But for kids today to know that there are books, maybe I even saw it in the library last week and now it's gone. That's an even bigger deal, because now someone is telling you that for some reason your history is so bad that it can't be told, or that it's so unimportant that you don't need to read about it. And those kind of really intentional moves speak huge volumes to kids because the books are there. I think it's even more harmful that books are there and taken away than when there's not a book to begin with.
I'm starting to wonder, do you think the goal is almost not to ban the books, but just to challenge them so they can have the cover or defense of saying, we didn't ban a book, but they're getting tied up in bureaucracy almost in a way. So like the goal actually is just to challenge as many as they can. Yeah.
There have been, well, the president and our governor in Florida both have said, well, we're not banning books. Well, yeah, obviously you are, but it's been that exact same thing, I think, Chad, that they were able to say, oh no, we're just challenging that. We're allowing parents to voice their thoughts and their feelings, and we're looking with a rubric at these books. But in essence, you've removed them from kids, so they're not able to check them out or put their hands on them. Teachers can't have them in their classrooms. I took early retirement at the end of 2020, and even then, elementary teachers had huge classroom libraries because our kids could go and pick a book at any time during the day when they wanted to read some more, or wanted to take a book home and didn't have a chance to get to the school library. Even those books now in our state, you have to list out every book you have. The librarian the school has to go through and make sure those books are on an approved list. And so more and more kids are finding that there are fewer and fewer books to read that may represent them and their family, or may give them empathy and understanding of people who are different than them.
Yeah, I think that's such an important distinction to make, because I feel like the news media, traditional media outlets are trying to make this seem like such a black and white issue, but so much of it lies in that gray area, that being challenged, that being able to take books away from kids that were previously available without saying they're banned, but making sure they don't have access to them, and then using those talking points to try to convince people that what's happening isn't happening. So I really appreciate that distinction, because there is so much in that gray area that I'm seeing that I didn't even realize before this conversation today.
Yeah, and it creates this atmosphere of fear for teachers, librarians, principals, who might be just the exact people who would want to have books that show diversity, that included a full view of history. But now their careers, their licenses, etc., are threatened, could be threatened, just because of a book they had in their classroom, or in their school library, or that they allowed on campus.
I imagine, and I hope this is a correct assumption to make, but I'm assuming it and imagining that you've heard from parents or families who have read your books and stories and seen how they positively resonate with their children. And so I'm just curious if that is an accurate assumption to make. Have there been any moments from hearing from your readers that has really stayed with you? And what I'm trying to get here is positive impacts that your books have had, because it's one thing to talk about book bans and talk about it in theory, but in practice, I'm curious the positive impact that you've seen your books having on the communities.
Yeah, a couple of things come to mind immediately. I have a librarian friend in Missouri. Missouri is my home state. And I was back speaking to Missouri librarians maybe 2 or 3 years ago. In that room were administrators who were on the forefront of book banning in their districts, as well as librarians. But Tom, my librarian friend who introduced me, told a story about a student who came to his library in elementary school. And Tom knew the child, the child had grown up in the school, and thought that Pride might be a book that would be a good match for that kid. So he introduced, librarians, teachers do that all the time, trying to match kids in books for interest or themes or whatever the case might be. When the kid came back and returned the Pride, the child said, "Do you have any more rainbow books?" That's how he put it. "Do you have any more rainbow books?" And I think that the next one was Stonewall. My Stonewall book was what Tom led the kid to next. Next time, the kid came back and said, "Do you have any more Rob Sanders books?" And the third time they came back, it was, "Do you have any more of my books?"
Oh.
Because the kid, that's what kids are doing. They're finding themselves in books. And then I received this letter. This was written in October last year, but I received it like in May, because it went through my publisher. That's the only address the kid was able to find. So it went to New York City Random House and then found its way to the right editor and then to me. But I'll hold it up just so you can see it. This wonderful, probably I would guess 3rd grade handwriting. "Dear Rob Sanders, I'm writing to you because I realize that some people won't like that I'm trans. But that won't stop me, because it did not stop Harvey Milk. Even though people did not like what he was doing, he continued doing it. So thank you for telling his story, Rex." So a kid who can just find, undoubtedly, a kid in the midst of trying to find acceptance where they live and in their everyday life, found a little bit of that in a book.
Have you kept in contact?
Harvey's not trans, of course, but
yeah.
Still, the kid could find that kind of encouragement. I wrote back to Rex. It's always kind of, I like to be careful when I'm writing to kids and communicating with kids. But I did write back, and I sent another book to Rex, and I didn't hear back. I have no idea if Rex wrote this letter with parental permission or knowledge, or if that letter got to Rex that I sent or what. But I did respond and sent another book that had other heroes of our community in it, including some trans people. So maybe you could find some heroes within that group.
I mean, that letter says everything that we need to know about the importance of kids feeling safe and seen, and they have a feeling of belonging, which leads into my next question. And I think we pretty much have answered this, but if there's anything else you want to speak to on it, it's that when these stories are removed from libraries, what happens to a child's sense of belonging and to their imagination? How does it affect the way that they see themselves and their place in this world? And I know how I would answer that, but I'm curious from your perspective what that impact does to a child's sense of belonging.
Well, and can I start by saying that it's even bigger than just children? Because as I stated earlier, you and I, different generations, grew up without our history. I've never done a book launch that I didn't have people from 20 to 80 in the audience who didn't know their own history. I mean, people from the community who didn't know their own history. Plus, there would be obviously straight people who didn't know any of that history either. So it's all of us, because the history hasn't been told in ways that most of us have had access to it. So it's all of us that in the LGBTQ community, if you don't have a history, you don't know that you fit into a bigger picture. You don't know that there's a place in the world where others have taken the same steps you're taking and have lived the same truths you're living. So it's so important for everybody. And I don't care if you're, from the Midwest, straight, with 5 kids, you need to know your history as much as a single gay 65-year-old man needs to know his history, as much as a 6-year-old needs to know that their family is part of the history of the world too, and that we all have a place, and that our place is fine and good and relevant and important.
One thing that I try to do on this podcast and in everyday personal life is inform people that I come across of the LGBTQ plus history, because it's one that is deeply rich. But when you look at it on a timeline, I love a good timeline. I love a good chart, because I feel like you can just get a good sense of how far you've come in such a little amount of time. But I feel like it shows there's a real fragility to what it is that you're trying to protect and to grow. And so I've had friends who have come out, even at my age, I'm 30, friends who have come out within the past year or two. And this is not to say gay people, LGBTQ community can't be conservative, but I think it's really important to say, this is our history. You need to then take that history and apply it to the policies that are being taught, or not taught, but preached about and tried to pass at the local, state, and federal level, so people can have a good sense and idea about what their future might look like. I feel like there's such a missing piece with the way people vote and the way people advocate for certain things. It's like almost as if that history is missing. And if they had that piece of history, they might be able to see what their future might look like if they were able to grasp it. I'm not saying this as eloquently as I planned in my head. I'm thinking off the cuff here, because I'm just to talk about the importance of everyone understanding their history. I feel like even today, there's just so many people who don't understand it. And to that, I say thank you for doing your part and trying to teach that history of the LGBTQ plus community.
and that our history as LGBTQ people extends beyond. We immediately think of U.S. history, the U.S. people
Mm-hmm.
we know, like Bayard Rustin and Harvey Milk. And we have to realize, too, that we fit into larger history. And by that, I mean, I've been reading a lot about World War II, French resistance, just finished reading The Lavender People, which is about trans people in Nazi Germany. And that there are strikingly scary similarities between those days for the LGBT community and Germany, which was very progressive, very gay friendly until it wasn't. Just like it seems often our country may be in that same place as well, where we were celebrating just a few years ago marriage equality, and now we're wondering if that will last past another couple of years. So we need to be aware how history can repeat itself and how history is sometimes a step forward and 2 or 3 steps back.
Yeah, I often say we might have just gained this right, but it's absolutely not guaranteed. We have to work at it, and we have to protect it and nurture it and grow it. And it's when we assume that it's safe and it's protected, that's when we should be the most concerned. And in an environment like this, storytelling has almost become an act of resistance. And with this environment, how do you continue to create hope-filled stories and works? Where do you draw upon that hope from?
Yeah. And like most of us, you don't have hope every day. You try to find the hope every day anew. I decided some time ago, well, after Hillary lost the election, Pride was in process when that happened. Okay. And I had seen Pride as a book of celebration. Once that election happened, which seems like 100 years ago now, but I knew that Pride had become a book of necessity more than a book of celebration, that history had to be told. And so I also woke up that morning following that election knowing that my contribution could be writing. Other people will be the great orators, the great politicians, the policy writers and makers, but this was what my contribution could be. So I continue to look for stories that can be told, or stories that, for instance, I have a book coming out next year. I was watching the Super Bowl a couple of years ago. Let that sink in for a moment. If you knew me, you know how unlikely that was. I think I was waiting for halftime probably, but I became aware that on that field, I started Googling how many players are on the team, how many refs are there? And on that field, there were like 200 straight, that we knew of, 200 straight athletes. Where does a kid ever get to see 200 queer athletes on a field together?
Yeah.
And so I decided to write a book about queer athletes that celebrates 59 different athletes just in a rhyming, kind of romping way. So I continue to try to find what are some ways to tell our stories and introduce who we are, and that we're in every LGBTQ people are in every part of society and are contributing to our world. And I just find personal fulfillment in that. I learn about my community doing that, and I get excited about telling those stories. I also get excited about realizing that even as I'm learning things, I have to unlearn some things too. A lot of people have always thought that Harvey was the first out American elected to office. That you'll even hear people say that. It's not true. There were 2 women first elected who were out. Kathy Kozanchenko was elected to Ann Arbor City Council in 74. Elaine Noble, Massachusetts State House in 74. Jose Cerrillo ran for the same office that Harvey eventually won in 77. Jose ran for that as an out man in 1961.
Wow.
So you know, as I uncover all those layers, even in our story, there are so many stories that we don't know. We just have barely scratched the surface of our own history. So it's exciting to try to find those untold, unknown stories, not just for kids, but for all of us in the community.
These bans and challenges to books aren't happening in a vacuum. They're happening in public and in front of us right now. And a lot of people are calling it state-driven censorship. And as we said, these aren't just books about the LGBTQ community. They're about racial justice, about democracy. There are international books that are on the chopping block. And it very much does feel deliberate, especially in a place like Florida. And so what I'm curious about, and this question scares me a little bit when I was coming up with it, I was like, I don't know if I want to ask this one, but I think it's important to talk about, what do you think the end game is here? What, if it continues to go unchecked and unchallenged at the rate that it's going, what do you believe the end game, the desired end game is?
I think that there are people in powerful places that would really like to turn the clock back in every way imaginable, to a time when I believe that all this movement is really driven by straight white men, and most of them straight white Christian men. And as their power, influence, and a majority wane, that there's an attempt to make America great again, quote unquote, to turn back to a time, be it the 1950s. I don't know what the exact moment is, but I think there are people in the conservative movement who would like to see women at home being wives and mothers only, who would like to see marriages be between only men and women, and in some cases only between people of the same race. I think in every way turning back the clock. And the attacks on education, the attacks on voting rights, the attacks on everything that we thought was making us a country that was equitable and diverse is under threat. Most of us don't realize that because we're focused on sidewalks. You know, we've got to paint over the sidewalks for safety. No rainbows, no Black Lives Matter. We've got to take books out. Oh, the drag queens are in our libraries. You know, we're focused on things that aren't really the issue, but they're being made the issue, while more important and scary things are going on around us and threaten us as a country and as a people.
I'm so happy you say that because I've had this conversation twice in the past 24 hours. And I finished reading 107 Days by Vice President Kamala Harris a few days after the book came out. And there's a line in the book where she says, what we're seeing right now is a high velocity event. And I've had this conversation, like I said, in the past 24 hours twice now, because there are people who have said to me, well, I would understand all these through lines if I was as deeply ingrained in politics and the news as you are, but I'm not. So like, I don't have a full grasp on it. And I'm like, yes, exactly. Because it's a high velocity event. They're throwing 100 things at you so you can only focus on one of them. Right. And then as you focus on the painting over the sidewalks or to some of the points you just made, that's what they want us to focus on so they can get away with the 99 other things that are actually going to impact our life. That's going to have lasting changes and impacts and effects for, God forbid, but from the looks of it, for generations to come. So I'm really happy that you spoke to that because it is a message in her book that I have been trying to push out. And you beautifully tied that in. So thank you for that. What I'm now curious about, through your studies and research and teaching and writing, what echoes of history are you seeing with what's happening right now? Where are the parallels and what can we be learning from them? Because I know, I don't think I'm intelligent enough to be able to like look at certain historical moments and say, oh yeah, what's happening now can be tied back to this event or to this time period. Something tells me you do. And so I'm curious what those are and what we should be learning from that.
Definitely the evilness of trans, the demonization of the trans community is definitely a repeat of history. There was a trans community in Germany before World War II. It wasn't a worldwide phenomenon like now, but there wasn't internet and all that either, where things could be worldwide phenomena. But there were surgeries, there were identification papers that could be altered depending on one's identity, how they identified. So those things all went away. And even in our community, the LGBTQ community today, we see some people who aren't supporting our trans siblings. They're turning their backs on our trans siblings, and that's part of our community. And we need to realize that demonization of that part of our community is the beginning of the demonization of our entire community. That's not an end all. That's the beginning point. The banning of books. There's never been a time in history when the banning of books was something that the good guys did, and definitely that was part of the Nazi movement, the banning of books, the burning of books, the thinking that any kind of information about sexuality was evil. So those things in particular, knowing that that we forget often that members of the LGBTQ community were among those who were sent to concentration camps, and that even after World War II and the liberation of those camps, U.S. and Russian forces sent those people back to jail because they had violated the law, the anti-gay laws of the time. So while everyone else was freed, people from our community were sent back to a different jail, a different prison, after, I don't know how that relates to today, but it's an overwhelming realization that I've had this year from reading that I've done, that we, as a community, were not freed from prison when liberation came. So I'd encourage other people to read about that. Don't take my word for it. Just do some research on that, because it's a staggering thought, right?
Yeah. You've said before that if censorship keeps spreading, silence won't save us. And so for the teachers listening, for writers who are listening, to my audience who might be this might be the first time hearing about all of these issues, what does courage look like right now with what's going on for those individuals?
It looks like a teacher who will introduce their students to the public library and having a library card so that they have access to a library beyond what their school library might have in its collection. If your local libraries are also facing the same kind of challenges, it might be the teacher who's introducing them to how you can have an online library card with the New York City Public Libraries or any of those kind of resources. It looks like a librarian like my friend Tom, and teachers who connect kids to books they think will be good matches. It is befriending families in schools. If you're in the PTA at your school, or you're a teacher at your school, and you know that you have a family that's represented in the LGBTQ community, or who are Black or Hispanic, and those books aren't readily available in your library anymore, you let those parents know about those books that might be great for their families when you're having parent-teacher conferences. You get information to the people who need them. You find places to put books, little free libraries, a library space in your church or your mosque or your synagogue where kids, families can know they can come and find books that aren't elsewhere. If you want to know what books to include, just look at PEN America or ALA for a list of the most banned books. So do those things. Attend school board meetings. Go to city council meetings where public library issues. Those people who are standing up and being heard and using their voices, that's bravery. Authors who keep writing books, publishers who keep publishing books despite dwindling sales, because obviously if books are being banned, that can very well mean fewer outlets. School libraries are one of the biggest outlets for children's books, right? So, and then faith communities, many faith communities, and we were talking about our faith communities earlier, but many faith communities are the ones who are standing up and making their voices heard. From a United Methodist minister in our area who knelt on and prayed on our Black Lives Matter sidewalk when it was to be demolished, painted over, and was arrested for that act of defiance, to Baptist ministers who are speaking about Jesus's words, that we should still be remembering Jesus's words, and the Beatitudes, and we should be living those in our lives, to others who are taking positions. Find the people who share your thoughts, your heart, your vision, and join forces with them.
I'm really happy with what you said, because putting books in little free libraries, putting books in your church or in places where people know that they would be able to find the book that they might not be able to get at their school or library, recommending books to individuals. I'm really happy you said that, because one belief that I've been trying to expand upon and build into an upcoming episode on the podcast is how activism isn't just like sharing a message, but we have a moral and ethical obligation to be activists, to fill the gap when that's created because the government is either taking away rights or they're banning information. There's a gap, and we have a moral and ethical obligation to fill it. And so with what I just heard from you is it kind of feeds into that thought process that I've had. And here in Birmingham, all over my neighborhood, there are little free libraries, and there absolutely are books that provide people of all ages with stories that they can see themselves reflected in. So that perfect. I'm so happy you said that. But to keep it on that same vein of courage, I'm wondering also, what role do you believe that authors and educators and parents have to play at this moment in our country to defend the First Amendment, or First Amendment right now, before it's too late?
I feel for teachers. I feel for educators so much. I think I've mentioned already, I retired at the end of 2020. I took early retirement. That's COVID year,
Yep.
as educators call it. I'd gone, we'd finished the one semester where we were all locked down, and then the new fall semester, I was a brick and mortar teacher with mask and distance while other people were still teaching online. But when I took retirement, though all that was going on and that was difficult, none of what we're talking about now with Moms for Liberty and book banning and all that had arisen. That's happened since that time. And I don't know how I would navigate those waters. I had a wonderful principal, I had wonderful faculty that I worked with, but a wonderful librarian who still has every one of my books somewhere in her library. So I feel for those people. Parents, I would encourage parents to be supportive of teachers and realize you've always had power in the classroom. No one took away your power as a parent in the classroom. You always had the ability to visit on campus, to have parent-teacher meetings, to volunteer on campus, to do all those things. Teachers have been demonized to parents, and teachers are your child's best friend and your family's best advocate. So that's would be my message to parents, because working together, not only can you make a difference for your child, you can make a difference for your school, you can make a difference for your school district, and start having a voice and standing up when you hear things that aren't the truth being spoken. So that's very micro, but I think you definitely can do those kinds of things. Read and stay informed is something we all have to do. There's so much crap out there that, and so much of what we hear in news period is so emotionally charged, and that we lose the facts of what's going on. So find whatever your source is for good, solid news, and read history.
You say it's micro, but as we said, it's a high velocity event. They're throwing so much at us. It can feel so damn near impossible to even begin to understand where to start. And so I think starting at a micro level, like with what you just laid out, is a perfect example for where we should start, because we're not going to be able to start on a national stage, just like me by myself. That's not going to happen, but I can do a bunch of micro actions in my local home and community that will make it to a national level. So I think that's a very important point that you make there, and we can't underscore that enough. And on this, and we're heading into the final few questions here, but on this podcast, we do have lawmakers and policymakers and authors and notable individuals who come on here and who listen. And so for those individuals and the everyday listener who may not see the urgency of what is happening right now with state-driven censorship, what do you want them to understand? What do you want the takeaway message to be about what's truly at stake right now?
A wonderful African-American educator by the name of Rudine Sims Bishop years ago, in her research, coined the phrase that's used all the time now: mirrors, windows, and doors. And so as far as books go, we need to realize that every child needs a mirror, books that show them someone who is like them or like their family, that are windows that allow you to see people who are different from you, but to grow in appreciation, admiration, empathy for people who are different from you, and sliding glass doors. I describe sliding glass doors for children, that children don't often know yet who they are.
Yeah.
But a sliding glass door allows you to step through into the truth of who you are. And when you're ready for that, a 3-year-old who reads Pride is caught up in rainbows. That's what they always want to talk about. A 4th grader is caught up in injustice, because that's what 4th graders, that's the age of fair play. It's not fair. You hear that 40 times a day.
Yep.
A seventh grader is going to read that book and say, I have people who tell me that I don't count, I don't matter, I don't fit in. And here's somebody who said you can find pride in yourself and pride in your community. So every reader takes away something different.
Yeah.
When they're ready for it, they step through that door. Dr. Bishop was talking specifically about African-American children in her research, but it has so many implications for kids of any color, any minority group, and those in the LGBTQ community as well. So making sure that we have those kinds of books available. Books don't harm us. They inform us. And parents, definitely preview books. If you are concerned about what your child's reading, or better yet, read it together and answer their questions. Be open and honest and reflective about what's on the page, and grow with your child in understanding and empathy as well.
And my final question for you, Rob, what is it that you are not wrong about?
What I'm not wrong. There are so many things. Where should I begin? It's something I have said already today, but I want to say again. I'm not wrong about teachers being our friends, books being helpful, the LGBTQ community having a valid, important, critical place within society, and that I'm not wrong about that we all deserve to know our history and for our history to be known.
I know I've said this a million times. I'm happy that you say that, because all it takes, and I can attest to this, all it takes is having that one teacher that you can foster a relationship with and feel safe with growing up. That's all it takes to make a difference in a kid's life. And I don't understand why the government right now wants to make it more difficult for teachers to do their jobs. I don't know why we are not giving them more support than we are giving them, but it goes without being said that they are unsung heroes of our communities every single day. I thank you for the work that you're doing, that you have done, and that you continue to do. I hope to have you back on the podcast here soon, hopefully with good news that these bans are lifted and your books are finding their ways home to kids and adults alike. So I really want to thank you again for coming on today. It was a timely conversation, and it was an important one, and I cannot thank you enough for your time.
Thank you. And an author will always say, read, review, and request. Those are three things you can always do to help any author read their books, review them, because those Amazon and Goodreads things, those will always have an effect and request them in your libraries. That's one way to make sure books that you want kids to read are in your library. If we request that they be there.
Yep.
So thanks, Chad.
And so I just once again want to thank Rob Sanders for coming on to He's Not Wrong and sharing his story and talking about why this conversation matters at this exact moment in our history. And so with that being said, if you have something that you're not wrong about, I encourage you to give me a phone call at 205-538-3202, or you can leave me a voice message on my Instagram at He's Not Wrong Podcast, or you can send me an email at chat@he'snotwrongpodcast.com. I look forward to hearing from you. I'll be sure to use your voice messages and your messages in future episodes. We have some really exciting episodes lined up for the remainder of this year. Some really amazing guests, amazing topics, big names. And so I look forward to sharing those episodes with you. I hope you tune in, share this with your friends and family. Be sure to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify. Your reviews really, truly do help us out more than you know. Give me a follow on Instagram and TikTok, and I will see you next Sunday.